Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to this Fusion21 webinar, COVID-19, the recovery stage, an assets special. This webinar is the second in the series that we've put together to share with members and others how the sector is preparing to enter what we're calling the recovery stage of this terrible pandemic. The first session, and many of you may have been on that, took place on the 12th of May, and we'll shortly be announcing a further in this series, some on compliance, hopefully social value, and also a session on decarbonisation. At Fusion21, we have a desire to continue to add value to our members, and we very much welcome this opportunity to speak to you today. Hopefully today's session will be insightful, thought-provoking, and aims to give you some of the very latest thinking in the sector with as we said, a particular emphasis on assets. I'm Andrew Gray, Member Relationships Manager at Fusion21, and now I'd like to introduce today's panel with apologies to our first speaker, Cath Murray-Howard, who I haven't actually just realised, Cath, I haven't put you on my slide, but anyway, I will make amends.
That's okay. I'll make my presence known, Andrew. That's fine.
Cath Murray-Howard is CEO from Torus, and she has very kindly stepped in at the last minute. Unfortunately, Paul Griffiths from Dudley has had to pull out, and yes, we're really grateful that Cath has been able to step in. We also have on the panel, delighted to welcome Phil Pemberton, Director of Asset Strategy and Delivery at Riverside, Mark Astbury, who's a partner at Ridge & Partners, and hopefully, though we're just waiting for him to actually join us, but also hopefully Matt Clarke, Managing Director of MCP Property Services. So a big welcome to our panel. We do want to hear from you, and we're delighted that so many of you joined. The count keeps going up as we speak, so we nearly have 200 people currently on the line, and you're all very, very welcome. Please do answer a question. Hopefully the slide that you can see in front of you, that shows the audio options, also the question box, and you can enter your questions in the box, and hopefully you'll be able to join us. I'm just going to see if Matt is able to join us, but just whilst we're doing that, let's move on to the first question. So now that the government is slowly lifting the restrictions on the type of works that can be undertaken, and fresh guidance on how organisations are responding, and government guidance on the lockdown have been recently produced. Let's start with you, Cath. Torus is a diverse housing group, and I know that as CEO you're responsible for both landlord function and also the delivery of the commercial contractor HMS. How are you approaching this next stage?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So I think you may have promoted me. I'm actually Chief Operating Officer and CEO, aren't I? So unless you know something I don't, of course, and that would be interesting. So exactly as you say, I'm responsible for the assets function, the landlord function, the commercial contracting function, which is HMS, and actually for the social impact sort of side of things, the Torus Foundation. So it's been an interesting few months. So in terms of now that there's been an easing of the rules around lockdown, we started some planning about 4 weeks ago now where we divided our teams into working groups, so just key work streams around voids, general cleaning, cyclical maintenance, and so on. All of our facilities management, rents, allocations, you name it, we've got a set of working groups, and they've been responsible for building really detailed recovery plans. Those plans have been coming to our, what we call our gold response group, which is the group that responds to COVID-19 in the last few weeks, and they've been approved, you know, that so they have to go through sort of a mini approval process to check that we're comfortable to get back on site. Voids came first and then others have followed, and by next week we'll be in a position where we're signing up allocations again. Everything in terms of assets will be on site, albeit not at 100%, so I will come to that, and all operating within safe working practices. I think for us, the challenge has been around balancing that capacity that HMS can deliver for us now, with what they can do in people's homes and on site, versus the need to clear the backlogs. And I think obviously we'll come to that in the next question, but that feels like the challenge that we've got at the moment, and how we sort of balance those key things, I think, is going to be absolutely key. Everything that we're doing is within safe working practices, as you would expect. Everything follows strict guidance from the government. We don't go beyond that, though. Everything that we do absolutely follows the guidance. We don't go beyond it, because tenants may get nervous, but provided we're able to say that it's been signed off from a health and safety committee, that the particular equipment that we're wearing, or whatever that looks like, is absolutely within government guidance, we're fine. So that's us, yeah. And it's quite interesting watching how things are getting back up to speed. It's lovely, actually. It's a lovely thing to see, because, you know, you're starting to feel like normality again, and we're starting to see photographs come through of schemes being signed off, and, you know, just things starting to move again. So yeah.
Okay, that's great, Matt. Hopefully you have now been able to join us. Just want to check that we can hear you.
Good afternoon. Apologies, I joined as a guest, not clicked the wrong link. So apologies, Andrew. Here and yeah, thank you.
Excellent. So from a contracting side, obviously MCP provide a full range of maintenance and repairs service. How are you now starting to up the delivery of those services to both your sort of housing association and local authority partners?
So we took our recovery planning started as lockdown started in effect. With Boris Johnson's notification a few weeks ago, we were quite quick to react to get our people back to work. Majority of people wanted to work. We had our safe working practices and risk assessments, guidance, etc., organised and ready to deliver. What we found, having been back to about 85% capacity for the last fortnight, so last week and into this week, is most residents desire us to continue to do the work. Was expecting some frustrations from residents because they've been waiting for things for a while. We've not actually had that yet, but that might be coming. Certainly when we start looking at moving through the backlog, and potentially the time taken to undertake repairs is going to be slower than before. I've got some mitigations, I'll talk about that in a minute. So kind of in terms of insight, 80% of residents generally wish us to undertake work. Some analytical data on the ground, some anecdotal stuff from our trade colleagues is social distancing continues to be a challenge in people's properties. Our process probably along the lines of most people are, arrive at the door, make a phone call from the van, ask residents to open doors, etc. Some residents are choosing to not necessarily follow social distancing, and a few of our guys have turned around to see a resident standing 2 foot behind them. So that's being a bit of a challenge. Our view to get back to work is that it's going to be very disruptive from our trade colleagues' perspective, and let's get in there first. So last week was a bit of a challenge for our guys. Some very keen to go back to work with not much to do. our view was to get through that pain of, in effect, remobilising our business 140 trade colleagues, so from 20 trade colleagues back up to 140 trade colleagues, was always going to be a challenge. And our view was to get that challenge out of the way, get ourselves back in order, ready for when our customers start returning to raising orders, etc. Capacity of people, we're about 85%, slightly higher this week. Those that aren't working pretty much fall into two categories. Those that have got underlying health conditions, following an additional risk assessment that we took, as Cath said, following government guidelines, we took a bit more of a risk-averse approach to some of our colleagues. And then others that are just suffering with childcare issues, myself being one of them, having 3 young children at home and trying to blend work with childcare responsibilities is very difficult for a lot of our colleagues. So we've continued to enable them to be on furlough with the remainder of our staff picking up the slack, so to speak, until schools return.
Okay, that's excellent. Moving on to Phil. Riverside is a large housing group operating throughout the country with both a range of internal and external supply partners. How are you sort of preparing for this next stage?
Well, first of all, many similarities to Matt and Cath at this stage. And first, I think the key message to our customers is that we're able to give a consistent message, no matter where you live and no matter who the provider is. But sitting behind the scenes, obviously, there's a lot of work had to go into that, to ensuring that all our partners are adopting the same stance going forward, so it can be consistent in that message to customers. Much as everybody else, that we continue to deliver compliance services in terms of gas and electric work and some of those inspections. Probably equally, many of the organisations have been struggling to get access on gas, so we're now faced with a backlog in that area which we need to tackle and to start to tackle quickly. We did keep a voids team going throughout the period, so that put us ahead of the game as we're coming out of the restrictions as well. But clearly, I think one of our major challenges was around the repair service. So we actually postponed on lockdown just short of 4,500 jobs. Our weekly activity is probably somewhere in the region of 3,500, and we continue to get about 800 jobs in. So now we've got to find that balance of continuing to do those 800 jobs as demand increases, but also shifting the backlog. But obviously, some of the challenges alongside that, first of all, ensuring that all our workforce are trained appropriately and in that consistent service level, so that we can ensure that people are keeping safe. And again, some of those challenges that both Matt and Cath have also come across, we've also got. We've had a 4-phased approach, which we've developed within the team and had signed off by the incident response team. So our first phase is to go into that backlog where it's safe to do so, to concentrating on things like external works, or those which we consider as a first-time fix, which is short duration for one person. We're hoping to move to phase 2 very soon, which is when we're going to start taking specific orders, which we can do safely as well. We think, though, that these plans really, as we go through the phases, we're probably going to take us the best part 2 to 3 months to actually get back to what you'd see as a business as usual that we saw prior to lockdown. I suppose some of our other challenges are around our planned programme as well. We've only identified small amounts of work which we can proceed safely with. Those include 1-day boiler swaps, some of the external works around windows and doors, which we'll probably introduce in and around July. But as many organisations are struggling to find what is a safe working practice for kitchen and bathroom refurbishment jobs, so at the moment. They are pretty much in the distance at the moment, and may or may not take place this financial year. Equally, we haven't got any plans into going to our sheltered accommodation to carry out some of those planned works. So all of that has a knock-on effect to the workforce of our wholly owned subsidiaries and the external contractors. And I think probably the only other thing as part of our planning is we're trying to ease the lockdown slowly, but in a controlled manner, so that we're actually ready that if we get a further lockdown, and as an organisation that's operating nationally, we've got to be ready for lockdown in specific geographical areas. So that's forming part of our planning.
Okay, that's excellent. And finally, in terms of these opening remarks, Mark Astbury from Ridge and Partners. Obviously, Ridge provide a range of professional services to both Fusion21 members and others across the country. How have the restrictions affected you? And again, how are you now getting back to providing services? And perhaps more importantly, what services are your clients starting to ask for?
Thanks, Andy. Good afternoon, everyone. Ridge is a multidisciplinary practice, had a fairly immediate impact from the COVID virus due to the cessation of basically all survey fieldwork and some other site-related work. So automated fire detection works that we were doing in sheltered schemes, etc., all basically stopped overnight. As a practice, we have 11 offices which were all closed shortly after the 23rd of March. So about 650 of us found ourselves then working from home, which I have to say has gone very well. We've also had parts of the practice affected by other sectors such as retail sector and the works we do for airports, etc. But in terms of concentrating on housing, clearly for this call, as well as the stock surveys stopping, we've had to obviously furlough a number of site surveyors, fieldwork managers, and the guys who would deal with the data coming back from stock condition surveys. However, to echo what the other guys have said, ongoing work has been for things like fire risk assessments, particularly for the higher risk types of accommodation, or where fire risk assessments weren't in date or overdue or hadn't been carried out previously. The timing also overlapped with the submission of the Delta data for MHCLG, which was the end of March. So we did continue with some of the cladding investigation work to get those uploaded. Has to be said, some people did leave that a little bit late in the day to get it done, but we managed to get them across the line. But that has also resulted in further follow-up work in terms of that ongoing cladding investigation as part of the bigger sort of government initiative. The lockdown has given us the opportunity to concentrate on more desktop related work. So we've been helping a variety of clients in terms of updating asset management strategies. We're undertaking a number of compliance reviews at the moment, and also doing sort of rechecks or redoing asset performance modelling. So obviously, in terms of being responsible for the consultancy team in the affordable housing sector, you know, keeping the guys busy doing that sort of worthwhile exercise is why we've had the pause on things like stock surveys, has managed to keep us going. As a wider practice, particularly our health and safety and principal designer type roles, they have been closely involved with safe working practices, risk assessments, method statements, both for clients' offices, but also for construction sites for some of the house builders, etc. So that's what we've been doing. In terms of echo probably what the others have said in terms of what we're doing now. It is about a safe return to both offices for some of our staff, probably in a phased manner. Those that really have struggled, you know, such as some of the designers who need to print off large-scale drawings, etc., getting them back into a safe working office environment. but many of us will probably remain working from home probably through until July. But also similarly assisting clients with measures so that they can get their staff back to work. And we are also now starting to do more survey field work, predominantly external surveys and common areas with the necessary COVID risk assessments, method statements following the fairly recently published guidance. So we're not actively surveying in residents' homes at the moment, but we are at least starting to get that field work starting again.
Okay, that's great. We have a sort of a couple of well, we've had quite a few questions, and thank you the audience for sending those in, and please keep sending in those questions. I'm just going to sort of wrap a few of them together just before we move on to the second sort of set questions. So some of the questions have been around supply of PPE, whether or not there have been any issues with procurement, materials, etc., and a sort of two sort of specific questions for perhaps Cath and Phil in terms of the planned works that I think, Cath, you said you were planning to start next week, and also the issue of the regulator and how you are recording non-access and views on the sort of regulator. And then one sort of final question, which again I think you touched on a little bit, Mark, was around planned FRA work. So Cath, could you sort of, again, we're trying to keep responses as brief as we can so we can get through as many questions, but also as many of the set questions we have. So if you could just have a quick go at answering some of those, and then Phil, and then perhaps Matt.
Andrew, with the first, so the second one was compliance, the third one was FRA. What was the first theme that you wanted me to cover?
With about whether or not there's been the sort of programme of works that you might be starting, planned works, and then I'll perhaps get Matt to answer the question on procurement of materials and PPE. Yeah.
So in terms of the planned, I mean, to answer the question about PPE and procurement of materials, I think, like everybody, we struggled early on, and it was a real fight to sort of get ourselves sort of into a groove, really, in terms of securing the right PPE and the right equipment. But I think we're there now. I don't think that's as big an issue. But in terms of the planned works, that's a challenge. It's going to be a huge challenge, and we have a huge programme of works to deliver this year. That's the work that starts next week. Other stuff has been being phased in, and we fit it into two categories. We've got the planned works within smaller void properties and within people in tenanted properties, but then we also have non-management voids, which is a huge programme of works which will involve wholesale changes of massive buildings, you know, defunct flat schemes, old care homes that need to be remodeled, those sorts of things. So as we speak, this period of time has been a great opportunity to get all that planning and scoping work done, and then we hope to be able to get that properly underway sort of late summer, early autumn. I think it's fair to say that the planned work is going to be difficult, but our capacity is going to be focused on our voids work. So that's where we're going, but we think we've got a way of working that keeps our operatives safe and keeps the tenants safe, and there's a huge communication plan that's sat behind it, which we think has been probably one of our strengths, if you like, sort of that ongoing communication with the tenants, that ongoing communication with colleagues to just reassure them that their safety is at our heart. And we've done videos and all sorts of things to just help demonstrate to people that what we're doing is safe. And we have a thing, if we can safely work, we will. And it's sort of simple as that, really. In terms of the compliance stuff, we've had a massive challenge, as probably everyone else have. You know, our gas compliance was virtually 100%, and then because of the dates that particularly the gas certificates expire, we're now at a huge number to clear from a backlog perspective. We have improved massively the way that we work in people's houses. I think from week one, access rate went to 6%. It was just quite frightening. We're now at something like 60-odd% because of the really careful way that we're working with tenants, the way that we're communicating, the processes that we're using, and the way that we're recording those no access as well is absolutely key and critical as we sort of come out of this. And the regulator, I'm sure, will ask us those questions. It's been a challenge, but I'm really proud of the team, the way that we've managed to improve the access rate, even in spite of everything that's been happening. They've been really creative, they've been really communicative, and like I say, it's been supported by some really strong communications on safe ways of working. I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, thanks. Phil, anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, just a couple of bits then. One was around materials. So when I talked about the 4 phases that we're working through on repairs and planned over the next couple of months, one of the factors that we thought about was the availability of materials. I'm sure many delegates understand that there's been some challenges in respect of powders, i.e. cements and plaster. I know it is coming back to the market now, so we have the same challenges as everybody else. We are starting to get some supplies through. Equally, the kitchen manufacturers, I think, only opened about a week ago. So any back orders that are in there will be the ones that we finish first, and therefore there's probably the best part of a 6 to 8 week lead-in time. So those were some of the key issues around materials. In terms of PPE, our experience was probably the same as everybody else. We struggled, just like the government, to get any at first, but the procurement team have really worked around the clock and managed to get us to where we need to be. So at this current point in time, we have sufficient. But I think the point that I would make in terms of PPE is that everything we're doing is risk assessed at the moment, and where we see PPE, that's the last form of defence, and social distancing, it needs to be the first form. So I won't go on to the gas in respect of where we are given Cath's answer. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to move on to the next question, which is about those sort of long-term financial issues, and in particular how we think this might affect asset spending going forward. Many of us remember the rent cut and what that did to asset spending. In terms of the crisis, what do we think? Again, Phil, start with you.
Okay, well, I think it's inevitable there's going to be a significant impact on repairs and maintenance budget. I mean, already we're now in month 3 and we've already seen void loss, rent collection challenges, service charges. I know they're variable. Again, we're already getting customers asking what the service charges are going to be like at the end of the year. And when we put those things in the business plan, we also have to consider the reduced profit in the wholly owned subsidiary as a result of COVID in the last 10 weeks. So for us, we're already starting to reforecast to find savings within our present budgets. I think one of the challenges in that is actually forecasting the demand on repairs, which will be a key one. We don't know whether the people have been sitting on repairs now for the first 8 weeks, or whether they're going to order them, or whether they're just going to sit back. We also don't know how residents are going to consider the repair service going forward. So we've got a very cautious approach to that. We've got a real focus on voids and trying to do those voids at the most appropriate cost. We've just had meetings today with a view to considering what that void standard looks like this year to get the very best value out of it. I think there's going to be some key issues around procurement though, in terms of tendered rates. It's inevitable that social distancing, whether you're doing a repairs and maintenance contract or a planned investment, there's inevitable extra costs alongside that. We're even seeing extra costs coming in areas such as grass cutting as well, where extra vehicles are an implication as well. So it's inevitable that this is all going to put pressure on the account. So I can't say I've got the answers at this stage, but as a sector, I think we've always been resilient and managed to undertake change and against these challenges. So I foresee over the next couple of months, those are the issues we're going to have to work through.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Moving on to Mark again from Ridge's perspective, and again you're working with both housing associations and local authorities across the country. How are you hearing that how the crisis might affect them financially?
Thanks, Andy. I mean, I think as Phil said, you know, we have fairly recent experience in terms of the rent reduction, which caused us all to have to go away and rethink. Obviously, the 2008-2009 post-Lehman's recession, where you know the market slowed down significantly in terms of activity, particularly in the housing market, etc. Various economists are forecasting various types of recessions, but as Phil's just said, the sector has tended to be quite resilient. In terms of the immediate impact, I've heard and seen of plan works programs being reduced from anything from around 10 to 15% to 80%. So there's clearly going to be a need to reset business plans and look at the way that particularly sort of landlord compliance, including the fire cladding work I mentioned earlier, other health safety risks, etc., are addressed, and prioritising those. So business plan updating is something that we're starting to see and starting to get involved in. I think in terms of the impact across the sector, I think it's going to be dependent partly on the nature of the organisation, how its reserves hold out, how well financed it is, and whether they can sustain and absorb the COVID-related costs and other things just generally slowing down. Some are going to be probably more exposed to that than others, particularly probably the smaller ones, those who've been sort of higher proportion of costs related to COVID. So I'm thinking of particularly sheltered, supported schemes. So, you know, those that sort of specialise in those types of areas, I think, are going to have more significant challenges than potentially those with more higher proportions of general needs accommodation. Obviously, in terms of the housing market, you know, whilst you know sales and lettings can now resume, we'll have to see how the general housing market responds. Hopefully, you know, a short period of time before it starts moving again, because that does obviously impact on cross subsidies, particularly with market sales, etc. But you know, the macroeconomic position, you know, we have a substantial over 337 billion, I think, in terms of cost for COVID that is going to have to be paid for somewhere, and it's pretty well documented. As Phil's already said, you know, voids in some cases, our clients have seen those now double, so they are going to be a priority. And I think Inside Housing reported that you know, rent arrears is over sort of 100 million. So I think, you know, it's going to affect us all in slightly different ways. But the big thing for me in terms of how well we come out of this is really going to be around confidence, because if we don't have confidence, as happened post Lehman's, the dominoes fall very quickly, and part of that confidence has got to come from government support, or at least clarity on government support, so that we can properly plan and get our contingency plans in place.
Okay, that's great. Cath, I'm aware that Torus is a sort of financially robust organisation following a fairly recent merger, but how do you think the crisis is going to affect your future spending, and again, what do you see as the risks that lie ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I think similar to what Phil was describing. So there is going to be an impact, and we know that that's inevitable. And you know, I think as you're aware, we are already sort of recasting the business plan. But it's a tale of two halves, isn't it? Because if you have effectively had a whole quarter where you're significantly budgeted asset spend isn't being spent, and your 38 sort of on-site new builds haven't been built, then you've not been spending the money that was put by to do that work. So in terms of cash, that seems fine. The issue for us is a real balancing act, because, as you know, we've got our wholly owned subsidiary, which is HMS, which is the commercial contractor. So the priority has to be sort of injecting some financial stability back into HMS, because they literally sort of, it disappeared overnight. So clearing those backlogs is going to be key. So the voids backlogs, as others have said, and obviously on compliance. So, you know, on compliance in particular on gas, we're actually saying that we're probably going to spend more than we budgeted for, because of the speed at which we want to try and get that compliance back in line and get that money injected in. And likewise with voids, we want to get that backlog cleared as quickly as possible so that allocations can work with them and so on. So there's going to be an injection of expenditure that we're going to need to do. But in the medium and the long term, the year is looking like, yes, we're going to have a reduction in rents. And I think we're probably, as someone said, you know, between 10 and 80% reductions in income. I think we're probably thinking sort of the 10% in terms of reductions on our budgets and in reductions in our rents. So as we're reshaping the business plan, we're looking at a variety of scenarios. So we're looking at, do we do less development and keep going with our investment in our stock and obviously the management costs? Do we do less management costs and more development and more assets, or do we do a blend of everything? And I think the way that we're going to end this is probably to come up with a blend of everything, because investing in our stock was always important, and it almost feels more important now, provided we're able to physically get into these properties and to do the works. We think that's sort of key to the recovery process, really. So yeah, there's going to be an impact, no question, but we're just not quite sure what that looks like and how that is going to reshape the business plan just yet. We're doing the work as we speak. I mean, that's the work we're doing now. So yeah.
Okay, Matt, moving on from you, and obviously has this contracting perspective. And again, we have had a couple of questions around concerns expressed about rising costs, and therefore, you know, you and your supplier colleagues passing these on to the sector. You know, what sort of your view? You may also, you know, that issue of procurement leading to rising costs, social distancing leading to rising costs. So how do you see the future?
So it's a bit of a kind of like, from a contractor's perspective, picking up on what Phil and Cath were saying, really, spend dropped through the floor in March. Lot of planning as to what that impacts to the business. HMRC and the government have been really supportive. Our customers as well have been really supportive by continuing to pay us earlier on time, enabling us to support our supply chain partners, material providers, etc. So from a cash perspective, we're actually looking quite good. The challenge is that cash flow cycle, which stopped, so all the cash ended up in the bank and in our supply chain partners bank, now needs to be reinvested back in the business to get back to normal. So the challenge I think contractors will have is more kind of around October time, when the government support ends, and those that have been operating on particular fine margins and using playing with cash to keep the business going may struggle, and we're seeing that already from a variety of different sized businesses. It was interesting to hear about the reduction in costs that Cath and Phil mentioned. Working predominantly in the social housing sector, if our clients are not getting their income, they're going to have less money to spend on repairs, maintenance, planned works, programs, etc. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. We project planned as to what this is going to financially cost the business over a 12-month period, and we have a variety of different options. The option that's the reality is not the worst case option, which was a lockdown till February, and our view on that was, well, if we're locked down in February, we'll be growing potatoes in the back garden, because the economy will fail. So we're in a not a bad situation. We've basically written off £500,000 for the COVID scenario. That was our budgeted plan. That's what it's going to cost us. We're substantially lower than that, which is fantastic news for me as a principal shareholder and managing director. In terms of the commercials going forward, and this might be a bit, I'm bucking the trend here. So if we were to enter into a term contract now, and we've entered into 2 small repairs, maintenance and plan programs during COVID, which was challenging and fun, that yes, PPE has the cost has gone through the roof. It's 300%, 400%, 500% higher than what we budgeted for. It's not a material number in a standard P&L. Yes, social distancing is going to impact the number of jobs that people do. But there's technology and things to work differently, not necessarily just put the burden on our clients who have got their own suite of challenges that Cath and Phil mentioned. So working closer with your supply chain partners to make sure you've got the right van stock to enable first time fix, using remote assist virtual technology to be able to see what a resident sees and support them in fixing it without the need to attend, are just different ways of working. And I think we need to embrace those habits now, rather than trying to pass those additional costs straight through to our clients. As you can imagine, I'm not necessarily popular in the contracting world by making that statement.
Yeah, no, but that's really interesting. Just in terms of just touching back on that point of the availability of supplies and procurement of materials, how are you seeing that from a contracting perspective?
We're not back to normal now, Andrew. So when our supply chain partners closed their merchants and we were in an emergency only service, quite fortunate that we have high levels of van stock, and those that weren't working basically opened the doors to those that were working. So we've got a bit of a headache to sort out all of our stock in our vans. So the impact during COVID wasn't too much of a challenge. PPE, yes, got close. We supply chain partners supported and we're over that hurdle. Moving forward, all of our providers have been fantastic. As I think it was Phil mentioned earlier on, plaster, etc., will be a challenge. Fitting kitchens in voids is going to be a challenge, which I haven't got the detail as to what the actual impact of that has been this week. Similar to kind of Cath, we've been doing voids throughout the period. Obviously not those in sheltered accommodation, and generally those that need less capital spend, where we don't need to fit kitchen, bathroom, rewire, boiler, etc. So we've got that to work through, but I've got full belief that as a sector and with our supply chain partners that we will make it happen. Void turnaround times might be slightly longer, but yeah, I'm very confident.
Okay, excellent. So moving on, obviously the lockdown has led to many changes in how we delivered services. I mean, IT departments have, in some respects, been some real heroes, often introducing changes that they said would take months and being introduced in a matter of days. I believe that some of the changes that you have introduced may be here to stay, because they will add value to the customer experience. And again, there may also be changes in the way you actually deliver services, particularly as we tackle the backlog of repairs. That sort of use of technology, and again, I'm going to go back to you to start with Matt. I know MCP have been looking at how technology can be used to support service delivery, and how that's changed. Would you just like to explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I think most organisations, the first thing we did when the kind of COVID scenario, pandemic impacted us, was to pull out our disaster recovery programme, which was intended just for that. It was a short-term scenario. This is a disaster. What do we do to get out of it? Not to plan to work from home for 3 months. And yeah, the kind of IT colleagues have massively stepped up, built new telephone solutions in a matter of days to enable our contact centre to continue to operate, and enable some of our trade people that are that are sheltering or isolating to continue to provide services to their colleagues and also to our residents. Everyone's had Teams or Skype or a variety of different ways of communicating that haven't really had the impact. No one's really used them until now, and I'm sure everyone can appreciate Zoom, Teams just seems to be the new way forward. I think we'll see a further blend in terms of people's work-life balances, and it's going to be for a country as a world, not just for a sector. So why can't a trade supervisor start work at 4 in the morning, finish at 8, take his kids to school, and then finish at 2 once he's finished his work? There's no reason why not. And I think as a country, we need to start moving away from recording time and start moving to outcome-based measuring of productivity, etc. Trade colleagues, as I said earlier on, remote assists. We've got technology where we can screen share, video call each other so they can help each other fix problems. That's fantastic. For one of our challenges with our future generation apprenticeships is we struggle to have enough mentors for the number of apprentices we wanted to take on. Remote assist and video technology enables us to have our more experienced tradesmen, shall we say, maybe not necessarily out on the ground doing repairs themselves, but office or home based and available to talk through with some of our younger trade colleagues how to fix problems, create videos, share them with residents via self-service solutions to change the way that residents perceive repairs. I did a quick calculation this morning. We've saved our customers 50 out of hours emergencies in the last 3 weeks by using remote assist, so basically supporting the resident in fixing things like switching water off, changing light bulbs, finding out that the kettle's faulty, etc. So the question I've got to mull over is, what does our office look like in the future? Very keen to collaborate and co-locate, but why can't we co-locate virtually?
Yeah. Actually, yeah, that's very interesting. Phil, from sort of Riverside, how have you been adapting? And again, we've had a question around, you know, the Internet of Things and how that might affect asset management. And you know, how's it looking from a Riverside perspective?
Probably much the same as Matt, so to speak. First of all, so we've got our own IT heroes who, despite a number of years of many teams looking at agile and how to implement that, we managed to do it very quickly over a 2-week period. And basically, we've been running satisfactorily over the last 10 weeks, really, which is a real positive coming out of it. I suppose what we haven't spoke about at the moment is, as the restrictions get lifted, what does that leave us looking like? Well, one of the analysis we've done, we reckon that we can only fit between 20 and 25% of our staff into the existing offices due to the social distancing rules. So until a vaccine's found, this feels like it's here to stay anyway. So on the positives there, as a national organisation, we've got terrific savings in terms of times in meetings, travel, and also accommodation. So it's definitely having a significant impact in terms of cost saving, and therefore the opportunity to look at our carbon footprint and look at our offices within the group at the moment and how they're best used, or indeed we can look to divest in some of those. It's also fair to say that customer engagement is a key issue for us, and one of the real positives coming out of this is that our customer group have been accessible within a day's notice for us to consult with as a whole team. So I think there's some real big positives coming out of that. And then I'd also say that we've got a number of key projects which are ongoing at the moment, changing our CRM system, upgrading DRS, to name but a few. We're also looking at operative on way, and there's some of the same issues that Matt's been talking about. And those projects have managed to continue despite us working at Agile, and I think that's been a real positive. I've also been able to engage a lot quicker with a number of consultants we use across the UK. So, you know, I think there's some positives really coming out of this, really, which will be here and embedded to stay. I feel sure of that.
Yeah, excellent. Mark, from Ridge's perspective, how do you see services changing?
Thanks, Andy. I'll keep this brief because just conscious of time. I'm a chartered building surveyor by background, so I'm very much out and about and seeing people, etc. So lockdown has been quite a change for me, and I think a lot of our guys. But you know, we echo probably what the others have said in terms of, you know, accepting that there are other ways of working, that we should be flexible. Give people more flexibility, better work balance time, etc. We are consultants, so we sell our time. So we would always expect to have a degree of interface, and we'd want to keep that. But certainly more agile working, probably reducing the requirements for so much office space, as the other guys have said. And importantly, as mentioned, you know, reducing carbon footprint. If we don't need to be driving to places for face-to-face meetings, we can do them via Teams. Yeah, then absolutely, let's do that. And I fully agree. My taskbar now has many more video type apps on there than it did pre the 23rd of March. And yeah, we should be using that and embracing it. I think physical attendance and doing desktop works illustrated that, you know, we can operate in a slightly different way. But as I say, important to maintain some interface and to strike the right balance.
Excellent. From your perspective, Cath, and I have also just got a couple of questions which you might be able to incorporate in your response. One is around recruitment in the lockdown period, and also the second question around support, in particular for apprentices as a result of social distancing. You know, can you teach an apprentice how to mend something if you've got to be 2 meters away?
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of the positives and the new ways of working, I mean, everyone has so far said everything that I would have said. It's incredible how resonant it is across the sector, isn't it, in terms of that aiming to reduce the amount of time in office, working towards much more flexible ways of working, so that people have that better balance, more outcome focused rather than hours focused. So I won't repeat all of that, but one of the things that we are looking at, which is about how we interact with our customer, and I think for us it's going to end in 2 ways, and we were already going along this line anyway, and this has kind of helped make that happen faster. So we were already going to be interacting much more digitally with customers, so that those projects to have really advanced ways of digitally interacting will probably be brought forward, and that many projects have continued throughout. But then conversely, we still know there are lots and lots of customers who still want to interact with us, because we are part of their world, we want to be part of that community. So one of the things that we've been talking about in our reimagining phase, if you like, which comes after recovery, is we start to think about how we place ourselves in the communities, in our extra care schemes, in our community hubs, in our youth hubs, rather than in great big sort of glass head offices, if you like, that we start to almost sort of be the mountain and going to Mohammed and sort of being in and of our communities. We think that might be more of the way that we're going to work. So we're quite excited about that. In terms of recruitment, for the most part, we put a hold on major recruitment, although I will say we managed to recruit our Director of Organisational Development, which is a senior leader post during lockdown. We interviewed the final 4 candidates literally sort of, I think, a day before final lockdown, and then we've managed to do everything, including assessment sessions and all sorts of things digitally. So the same as everyone else, you know, this new world of screens and looking at ourselves, which I personally can't stand, but that's now part of our world, but so much more time effective. Support for apprentices is slightly different, and we had a debate about this in my little team meeting this morning. I think that there's been a challenge with that, if I was being completely honest. And I'm a board director of St Helens Chamber as well, and I know we found that very difficult because it's such a practical, so many of our apprentices are in practical physical roles, aren't they? So how we phase apprentices back in, because obviously many of them are on furlough at the moment, is going to be a challenge. That said, we're absolutely committed to recruiting as many apprentices as we can. We've just got to think a little bit differently about how they get taught and how they get the support that they need. And then there's something else for me on the sort of positives and the outcomes of this, which is about our sector being a really big part of the recovery. And we know, because of the relationships that we've got sort of within the combined city region around Liverpool and in Liverpool city centre and in St Helens, that we're being approached by those organisations to try to shape something that will inject some recovery. So some of the work around sort of MMC, retrofit strategies, how can we as a sector, construction, new builds, buying up sites, how can we as a sector sort of, I don't know, just inject some energy back into that recovery. So, and I think that's hugely positive, actually, and I think we can play a part, because I think, as someone said earlier, we are a resilient sector, and I think we can do that, and we've proven that we can act swiftly as well. So that's the only thing I wanted to say to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, and that sort of takes us sort of nicely into the final bit, and conscious of time, but hopefully the audience will bear with us for a few minutes more, and if we run over time, hopefully you'll bear with us for a few minutes, because we do want to try and finish on a really positive note, and looking at those positives, and Cath sort of made a start on that. But Mark, from your perspective, what do you think are the positives we can take from the crisis?
I think there has been several. I wrote down sort of 4 or 5 immediately without too much time to need to think about it. I think the nature of the sector's flexibility, reaction time, and being able to deal with it, and particularly the collaborative nature, which I've always found, having come from a commercial sort of background pre-housing, housing has always been a very collaborative sector. The two for me that I think are really important are probably the highlighting in terms of how we've dealt with homelessness people, and the ability to, albeit maybe temporary accommodation, how we've managed to deal with that, and it's highlighting the need for a longer term solution. But the other one key for me, and you know, I take this from my children as well, in terms of the Thursday clapping, etc., is it's really highlighted in terms of key worker accommodation, and the need to, you know, make sure that they get provided with truly affordable housing, because they have been, you know, the backbone and the first line of defence against this disease, and you know, we owe it to them as a sector to make sure they've got somewhere affordable to live.
Yeah, excellent. Phil, from your perspective.
Well, much the same as Cath and Matt in many ways, and I think what I'd highlight is the resilience of the sector and its ability to change. You know, I think that puts us really at the forefront, really. I think one of the key outcomes for me was just some of the ability of our staff to really live by the values of the business. We had 135 trade operatives who would normally be out there in the vans carrying out repairs. We actually moved them into our care and support teams to actually go and help in some of those establishments. And I think the long-term benefits that come alongside that part of the workforce understanding more of what goes on in the business, I think is a massive step forward for a business like ours. And the point I made before about agile and the ability to engage, I think what we've found is a new way of engaging with our customers, and the fact that we could convene a customer panel within 2 hours to actually get signed off some of our plans to actually help us through this crisis, I think was a massive success.
Excellent. Matt, from your perspective.
Well, it's kind of, first let's quickly touch on recruitment. We've continued to recruit during the COVID pandemic. Talking to some of our new starters, it has been tough. Not been able to make their initial impact that they would like on their new job, and also not physically meeting the team. There's a colleague of mine who is listening in who was interviewed twice, successfully started with the business prior to meeting anyone, which is new for everyone. I would strongly recommend something that we're about to launch with MCP is asking our colleagues what are the 10 things they want to take away from COVID. We need to start forming some new habits, not just as a sector, but just to how we operate overall. The kind of words that I put around the 10 positives are openness and honesty, ownership within our team. People can't lean over and ask the question of a colleague that they know the answer to themselves. They just have to work out the answer, so they own the outcome. And we've really built some fantastically strong relationships with our clients together. We've got through this well, and it's great to deliver that collaboration in a moment of challenge, and yeah, it's a fantastic relationship building.
Excellent. Finally, Cath, anything that you just wanted to add? And I know you finished your previous remarks with some positives, but was there anything else?
Just on that last topic, we did a session a few weeks ago, which was in our imagining phase, where we asked senior colleagues to come up with 6 things that would look like utopia for them in terms of this as we emerge from this, and we called it the Utopian 6, which was ridiculous. But there was some fantastic stuff around just looking at things so much more differently. Things like, taking ownership of things, delivering stuff, being much more swift in decision making, being much more customer focused. So that's one thing. And then we've just talked about this key worker issue. For me, the huge strength that's come out of this, we've seen it in our extra care schemes, in our domestic violence schemes, the commitment and the quality of people, and in the work that people have been doing with older people at night with their exercise classes and what have you, the commitment of people in our sector to just reach in and through into those communities has been illuminated probably far more than we ever thought. And the value that those individuals and those colleagues give to not only us as organisations, but their neighbourhoods and our communities is massive. So we do owe them, exactly as someone said, some really, some good housing, and we owe them that sort of recognition really as we come through this, that they've been the front line of this, and have just done an amazing job. Never ever ceases to amaze me. You almost can't thank them enough for the way that they've really reached in and through to more vulnerable people in the community. So yeah, that's been a huge positive for me. So.
Excellent. And so on that note, it just sort of leaves me to wrap up this session, and I think it's been an absolutely fantastic session. There's been lots of insights and sharing of information, and clearly lots of things in common. The themes around collaboration, the resilience of the sector, our ability to be agile and engaged. I would echo really what's going on. I want to thank our audience for being with us. Hopefully, I know we didn't answer all of your questions. Thank you very much for submitting those questions. If there's any sort of themes that we missed, we will try and get back to you if we can. I really want to thank the panel. I can do a little clap. Hopefully the rest of the audience can do a virtual clap. I'd like to thank you for sparing the time to be with us and for being open with your responses. As I said right at the very beginning, at Fusion21, we're committed to continuing to run these webinars. We're hoping to run one on the whole issue of compliance in the next week or so, as well as some others. So please look out for the emails or posting on our website. If you have missed this webinar, or colleagues have missed this webinar, it will be available on our website in the next 24 to 48 hours. thank you once again for joining us, and stay safe, stay alert, and good afternoon.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.